Hello and welcome to the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler, and today we're going to talk about the ongoing injury crisis saga for the 2024 Baltimore Orioles. Give you the latest updates, which I'm sure you've heard of by now, but talk through those, what it means for the Orioles, their chances, and whether or not we're worried about our lofty expectations at this point. I think the Orioles, we came into the year thinking not necessarily World Series or bust, but that World Series was within reach. We've continued to feel that way, but as the pitching injuries in particular stack up, is that insurmountable? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Before we get into that, I do want to shout out our sponsor for the episode. It's the same sponsor we've had for the last couple months, and that is, of course, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Getting a football read in the baseball show. From the preseason NFL to college kicking off, Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in our winner take all $300,000 NFL survivor pool for the upcoming season. And when the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our 150 slots games. So you can go to the website today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, and get in on the action at betonline.ag. BetOnline, the game starts here. Thanks to BetOnline for sponsoring this episode of the Warehouse Podcast. So, injury updates. We're probably all familiar with this at this point. I am recording this on Wednesday. The Orioles are currently playing against the Mets. I'm not watching that game as I'm trying to record this podcast here. So if anything crazy happens in there and I don't talk about it on this episode, that is going to be why. But hopefully no one else gets hurt because they've got enough to handle right now. The latest update there is that Zach Eflin, essentially the crown jewel of the Orioles trade deadline, I think, going into that deadline, the Orioles, there were hopes from the fan base that they would go and get a Garrett Crochet, get a Tarek Skubal. They did not go get a Cy Young candidate of that ilk. They got Zach Eflin instead, and Eflin has, arguably been as good or better than those two could have been to this point because he's just been really good. I'm looking at his numbers as an Oriole. He's made 4 starts. The Orioles have won all 4 games. He's gotten a win in every single one of them. He has a 2.13 ERA plus of 181. Like, even if the Orioles had gone and gotten someone instead of Eflin, I can't talk. Instead of Eflin, I don't think you would have gotten any better performance than what the Orioles have gotten from Eflin. He's been fantastic. The trade feels good in retrospect, and even better that the Orioles have him signed through 2025 on a reasonable salary. But of course, we cannot have nice things in the 2024 Orioles season because Eflin, due to the fact that he is a pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles this season, has to have an injury. It's basically mandatory at this point. Just about every starting pitcher, significant starting pitcher for the Orioles, has had an injury this season, apart from one who we'll talk about in just a second. But Eflin has been placed on the 15-day IL with right shoulder inflammation, not the dreaded elbow inflammation. Obviously, shoulders are important to pitching too, but don't seem to have the catastrophic outcomes that the elbows often do. So he is going to go on the IL with a right shoulder inflammation issue. However, manager Brandon Hyde did seem optimistic. After the news broke, he even said, we're optimistic that he's going to be able to not miss much time after the IL, if any. So 15 days, 2-3 starts, he's going to miss, and hopefully no more than that. But it exacerbates an issue that the Orioles have right now, because if you look at their pitching depth at the moment, it is Corbin Burnes, Dean Kramer, Trevor Rogers, Albert Suarez, and then Cade Povich, Cole Irvin. Irvin starting today. Povich came up when Eflin went down. Is Irvin probably up just for a spot start? Probably. And like I said, I'm not watching the game currently. He could be imploding as we speak, but it's Burnes and then sort of a leap of faith after that. We'll talk about all the guys right now and how they're doing because I think that's pertinent to the situation as well. But I don't need to, elaborate that much. The Orioles have a pitching depth issue at this point. I think coming into the season, you felt great about the Orioles pitching depth because it was, Burnes and Rodriguez at the top. You had Bradish and Means coming back from their offseason issues. but you felt, okay, they were going to be slow to ramp up. But once they were here, that's pretty good. And then Tyler Wells was up. Um, Dean Kramer was sort of your reliable number 4 at the back. Cole Irvin, I think you felt decent about as a swingman. He had shown some ability in that last year. So, yeah, let's have him pitch for a month or two in the rotation, then move to the bullpen, and that's a pretty good solution there. And that has somewhat worked to this point. We are, still a little bit more of more than a month left in the 2024 season, and the Orioles have, survived to this point. The Orioles are still, despite I would say, mediocre second half to this point, that being post All-Star break, they're still really, really good. The Orioles are still one of the top teams in all of baseball. I think they have the most wins in the American League. They might be percentage points behind the Guardians for best record, quote unquote, but the Orioles are still up there in contention for the AL East, in contention for the number 1 seed in the AL, and they are doing well. They're not quite on that 101 win pace that they would like to have been from last year. They won 101 games, and early on this year they were on like 106 win pace. They're not probably going to get to 100 wins this year, but still they're going to win 90 plus games, 95 maybe, make the playoffs. But it's a question now of if they've got the horses to kind of get through that finish line of getting to the postseason. And like I said at the beginning, I don't know that I came into the season. I don't think many people came into the season viewing it as a World Series or bust type year, despite the Corbin Burns trade being sort of a 2024 focused trade. The core is so young that this window is much larger than that, but windows close all the time. So obviously you want to do the most with what you've got this season because nothing is promised beyond that. And unfortunately, injuries have just ravaged the Orioles this season, and to a certain degree, that's you're not going to be able to fix that. That Kyle Bradish is out for the year. John Means is out for the year. If you want to talk about Felix Bautista getting hurt last year and that carrying over to this year, and the current, I don't even know what situation in the bullpen right now, where I guess Sir Anthony Dominguez is the closer. Craig Kimbrell might come back if he can figure stuff out. He looked okay on Tuesday, but certainly not the dominant back end guy that Felix Bautista is. All that wrapped into one, the pitching feels just a notch below where you would like it to be, and that certainly isn't helped by Eflin going on the IL here. So we know that. Let's talk about where we go immediately from here. So Burns is still around and still, I think, is in consideration for the AL Cy Young. He's probably not going to win it. He was, I think, probably a touch behind Skubal anyway, and now given recent performance, that feels even further out of reach. So let's talk about recent performance for Burns because, in addition to these injuries to arguably the 4 of your top 5 pitchers, if you're talking Rodriguez, who's out right now, we'll talk about him. Eflin, who's out right now. Means is out for the year. Bradish is out for the year. That's 4 of a really good 5. Burns is the only one left. And now Burns has recently kind of hit the skids a little bit. So let's talk about his recent performances in the month of August, because they have not been very good. He's made 3 starts in August. I'm on Baseball Reference, so forgive me for the kind of ad-libbing here. But he's made 3 starts in August, and of course it doesn't want to work for me. But he most recently, I'll just say most recently what he did was 4 innings against the Red Sox, in which he gave up 10 hits, allowed 8 runs, 3 walks, 7 strikeouts, and 2 home runs. The start before that against the Rays, 6 innings, 3 runs. Good, not great. That's one of those quality starts that I think you feel good about from the back half of your rotation. You'd love your ace to give you a little bit more than that. And the start before that was 5 innings, 7 hits, 5 runs, 4 earned, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts, 1 home run. In the month of August, he's seen his ERA raised from 2.47 to 3.10, which again is still solid, but not really Cy Young territory anymore. And I think, you start to worry, okay, the one guy we've actually been counting on this year and who's been dependable, is he's starting to run out of gas a little bit. It's, this is a guy that is a horse. He threw 193 and 2/3 innings last year, 202 innings in 2022. So this is a guy that is built up to go 200 innings. He can do it. He's on pace to probably come in just under that this year, 153 and 2/3 with about a month left. Probably not going to quite get to 200. but will certainly, be a top 10 Cy Young finisher at the very least. But is he starting to trail off a little bit? That's certainly a concern. That, what if Rodriguez doesn't get back and Eflin struggles after he comes back, and then you start to worry, okay, we've got maybe a game one starter who we don't feel great about given current performance. And is that going to equate to the Orioles having an early exit from the playoffs once again? I don't know. Doesn't feel great right now. But let's talk about the immediate outlook of the starting pitching situation. So first, Eflin, right shoulder inflammation. Orioles are sounding optimistic about it. Um, they don't want to do any other imaging on him, and they think he's going to come back right after the inflammation goes down. So it doesn't sound like there's anything structurally wrong. They are just being cautious with it, which we've seen the Orioles do this before with I think specifically Grayson Rodriguez early in the season when it didn't seem like there was anything wrong with him, super bad. They just kind of wanted to give him rest and be conservative when they felt like they could, because again, we talk about Elias's philosophy for, surviving a season all the time. And I think this is that on display, which is to say, look, guys, we don't need to win 60 or 70% of our games for every stretch of the season. You're going to have stretches where you go 500, you're going to have stretches where you go below 500, but in the aggregate, we believe in the talent we have in house to get us to the point that we would like to be, which I know is not super popular, and I don't even find it very appealing the way that some of these, Ivy League front office types talk about, building out a roster that you basically want to win. Like, aim for like 85 to 90 wins, like just try to be competitive. And then there's some variability that is going to get you over the top to where you want to be. But that is who we have in Elias. And to this point, I can't really complain too much about the way he has built out this team. Obviously, they've been able to absorb a ton of injuries this year when, last year that wasn't really an issue for the Orioles. The Orioles were quite healthy last year until that Bautista injury at the end of the year. Mountcastle had his vertigo stuff earlier in the season, but you didn't lose any of your stars. You had your pitching healthy pretty much all season. And I think that was a question coming into this year is what do the Orioles do when they get kind of hit in the jaw a little bit with the injury bug? Where do they go from there? And we're sort of seeing it right now, which has been the Orioles have been sort of meh for the last month or more of the season, 2 months almost. They've been basically a 500 team, but thankfully, so has pretty much the rest of the American League elite. Apart from like the Minnesota Twins are the only team I feel like that's really looked impressive and surging the last, few weeks or so. But all that to say that I think that this Orioles team is built in a way to say that we know guys are going to get hurt. We need to build depth to a certain degree. And the Orioles have displayed that this season. But we're getting to a point where that depth is about run out. However, this is a very long run on sentence or thought I've got here. They are buying as much time as they can here and utilizing the time they have left to get people right for the playoffs is sort of what I believe is happening with Eflin here, which is if it was October 1st and they needed Eflin to go in game 2 of the wild card or of the ALDS or whatever it may be, I think Eflin would be pitching, but they don't need him to do that. The Orioles are nowhere near being out of a playoff spot. Yes, the AL East is close, but they are comfortably in a playoff spot right now. So they have the longitude to say, all right, Zach, let's sit down. We need you. You're very important. You're much more important to us, right now than maybe we thought you were before Grayson Rodriguez went down. Certainly more than, we would have thought maybe they were thinking about Zach Eflin prior to the season, but in that scenario where you had Burns, Rodriguez, Bradish, Means, Wells, Irvin, I think you would have said, oh, a guy like a Zach Eflin, that's sort of surplus to requirements. We don't really need that. But given where the Orioles are now, right now, Eflin might be their number 2 pitcher, even with Rodriguez healthy. So they need Eflin fit for the playoffs. So why not just sit down for a little bit, take a week or two breather, and make sure you feel good and up to snuff for September, give you enough time to get the ball rolling again and be at full speed come October. So Eflin, I'm not worried about that. Rodriguez, I am worried about. right now. They are giving him a possible return date of late September. They are not giving a firm timeline at the moment. Last quote from Rodriguez was on August 17th when he said, "Right now, just taking it easy. So far, so good. Everything feels good." This, of course, was after he was scratched just moments before his August 6th start in Toronto, and cameras caught him mouthing the words, "He just doesn't feel right." It was diagnosed as a right lat slash tears strain, which is something he has had prior. This was back in, I think, later 2022, second half of 2022, when folks kind of speculated he was about to get the call up because he was pitching really well. The Orioles needed pitching. The Orioles were, competitive. There was speculation there. Then he had his lat issue then that was, according to reporting here, much more serious than this one. And he did not make his debut. Of course, didn't debut in the big leagues until 2023. That's a little scary because Rodriguez has already had injury stuff with this exact injury. He had injury stuff earlier in the year. He seems like a guy that just kind of gets nicked up a little bit, which that's, not even a criticism of him. It's just a reality. And if he doesn't get back till late September, is that enough time for him to get his feet wet and for the Orioles to feel comfortable about it? They won't really have a choice. I don't know that I'm going to prefer Trevor Rogers or Cade Povich to take the ball in the postseason. I might prefer Albert Suarez though, which is somebody we can talk on in a minute. But those are the two big injury updates on Rodriguez and Eflin. That Eflin should be back soon. Rodriguez will take a little bit longer, and hopefully they both are given enough time to ramp back up and feel confident going into the postseason with a 1-2-3 of Burns, Eflin, Rodriguez. Burns, I think right now the performance is not great, but the track record is there for him of being fantastic regardless. And then I think I was looking at his splits the other day career-wise. Of course, I'm not looking at this season by season, but just in his career, his worst month in his career has been August. He has a career ERA of 4 in the month of August, and then his career ERA in September and October is 2.68. So it could just be sort of the dog days of summer situation here where Burns slows down a little bit. He's feeling it a little bit and needs to kind of slow down, get his mechanics back, and figure some stuff out. But he's a veteran who's about to get paid this offseason. I'm sure he wants to put his best foot forward, so I'm not really worried about Burns. It's just, again, about surviving to that point. So to survive, to get to that point for the Orioles, they're going to need to rely on some guys that coming into the season, I don't know that they really expected to this degree. But it is what it is. And chief among those people is Albert Suarez. And I made this argument on Camden Chat this week that Albert Suarez has been the savior of the Orioles season to this point. Now, that's not to say the Orioles would have been a losing team without Albert Suarez, but I don't know that the Orioles are leading the AL East right now without Albert Suarez. Somebody else would have pitched the innings that he's pitched. Would they have pitched him as effectively as him? I highly doubt it. So let's look at Albert Suarez so far this season. Of course, he's pitched both in the bullpen and in the rotation. He's made 17 starts out of his 25 appearances, has a 3.1 ERA over 96 and a third innings, struck out 78, walked 33, has an ERA plus of 120. So he's 20% better than the average position or average pitcher during the 2024 season, which is really impressive for a guy that, for anybody, but for a guy that came into the season 7 years removed from his last big league pitch is really, really impressive stuff. So I'm now trying to look at his numbers from the rotation and from the bullpen, and they're really not crazy different. Of course, he's pitched a lot more out of the rotation, so the sample size is a little bit more usable. But his ERA is 3.19 as a starter. It's 3.09 as a reliever. He's got a whip of 1.335 as a starter, which is not great. It's a little worrisome. His whip as a reliever is under 1 at 0.943. But think about the situations that Suarez has been in this year. Orioles signed him last summer after he was released, or maybe in September, after he was released from the KBO with an injury. Starts the year in the minors, gets the call when Tyler Wells has his injury flare up that sort of came out of the blue. It was days after he pitched, and then of course we know that resulted in elbow surgery. But comes up and pitches in the rotation, does really well. Then it comes time for Kyle Bradish and John Means to come back. So Suarez dips into a relief role. Then I'm trying to remember, he does that for a bit, is pretty darn good in that role. And then what was it? Oh, well, then it's Bradish and Means both get hurt. So Suarez goes back into the rotation. Has some good starts there. It's not quite as good as his first run in the rotation, I don't believe. And you start to see the signs that he's getting gassed a little bit, it seems like. I think all of us collectively were like limping towards the trade deadline. Let's just get there, see what we can do. At the trade deadline, of course, the Orioles add Eflin and they add Rogers. Is Rogers an improvement over Suarez? You can make the argument he's not, but he's left-handed, has some upside, and Suarez had the benefit of having pitched in the rotation or in the bullpen earlier this year, and the Orioles needed bullpen help. So it was natural to say, okay, we'll put those two in the rotation. Suarez will move back to a bullpen role where we feel comfortable with him. I think he made one appearance out of the bullpen. Didn't go great, but they were going to stick with him, obviously. Then comes the Grayson Rodriguez game in Toronto where he just doesn't feel right. Suarez has to pitch with 10 minutes notice and just throws a gem. And he's just kind of been doing that now every fifth day for a while, which brings us to today. And in his 3 starts since rejoining the rotation, Suarez has thrown 17 and 2/3 innings, has 13 hits allowed, no runs, 3 walks, 17 strikeouts, no home runs. His ERA has dropped from 3.89 to 3.18 on the season. And right now, he is the Orioles pitcher that is in the best form. Of course, he's not the ace of the staff. Corbin Burns still is the ace of the staff, but he's pitching remarkably well. It's so impressive what he's doing. And that's why I say he is the savior of the season. He has filled in every role that he's asked to fill in from the jump. Rotation, spot starter, reliever, stopper. I mean, he's doing it all. And right now, he's the pitcher that when he toes the rubber, again, it's only 3 games. This is not to say he's some changed man, but he feels the most dominant of any Orioles starter right now. Pair that with Dean Kramer's start on Tuesday in New York, where he looked really good, the best he's looked since he got off the IL. I think you feel like the Orioles can survive this. And also, Cade Povich might have had his best start as a big leaguer. I need to find his line because he's been coming back up. And I'll say this about Povich. The results haven't been great for Povich this year, but there have been those nuggets of performance that I've been encouraged by, that he's a 24-year-old getting his first taste of the big leagues for a team that has, pennant aspirations. The 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 bar is quite high for performance this year for the Baltimore Orioles. Yes, the pitching's had injuries, but he needs to be firing on all cylinders, and he hasn't been doing that all year. But there's been those moments. That start against the Braves was fantastic. Then again, he looked really good against the Red Sox this last game. 6 1/3, 2 runs on 6 hits, no walks, which is very important for Povich. 6 strikeouts, no home runs. No home runs, no walks. That's the formula for everybody, but especially Povich, who, like, he's got games where he does well. At the Yankees game in June, only allowed 1 run and 1 hit, but he walked 5 guys. If he's not walking 5 guys, he goes 6 innings probably. And, maybe the Orioles win that game running away. These are young guy issues that I think the more he pitches, the better he's going to get. Not a guy that I really trust this year in super important games, but I've been encouraged in the general sense with Cade Povich this year. And again, he's helped the Orioles kind of survive to this point. And then, of course, there's Cole Irvin, who we've talked about on this podcast, was really important to the Orioles early on this season. It's gone awry a little bit. He got DFA'd after the deadline and all those pitching moves, but he's back again with a chance to kind of reassert himself that he might be able to earn a start or 2 here, and maybe that gets him a spot back in the bullpen if things aren't going well, because that's still something we're trying to figure out. Jesse talked about that in the last episode. So that's a lot to say, but the Orioles they're testing the limits of their pitching depth, because a lot of what I'm saying now is like kind of vibes based. It's hopeful. It's not necessarily based on what we're seeing right now. It's, you think Burns is just kind of having a rare hiccup. He'll bounce back, but we don't know that. Suarez has been really good recently, but he doesn't have a long enough track record for me to say I feel super confident about it. Eflin, we're being told that he'll be back after a short stay, but again, we got to see that to believe it. Povich is a rookie who had a good start after a really bad August. What do you believe there? And then Dean Kramer, we talk about him on this podcast all the time as kind of being like that ideal fifth starter. That's great. He still kind of is that. He's a good fifth starter, but I don't think the Orioles want to go into the postseason with him starting a game. I think he could go in the bullpen. He gives you an inning or two, and he can bridge the gap somewhere. But again, I don't think they want him facing any postseason lineups more than one time. And then Grayson Rodriguez is a big question mark injury wise. So, where do the Orioles sit there? I don't know. It doesn't feel great at the moment. But as I just said, as I said earlier on, a lot of the American League is in a similar situation of mediocrity. It's really just the Twins kind of surging right now, and the Twins do have some pitching that is exciting. The Mariners also have great pitching, but the Mariners have fallen apart here. The Yankees, I was looking up them earlier. They've got the names, but is Luis Heel slowing down? Probably. Garrett Cole doesn't quite feel like Garrett Cole. Um, Wanted to look at the standings just to get my bearings here. But yeah, it's the Twins. The Twins, the Royals have an exciting offense. It's I'm kind of floundering for words here because that just sort of is the AL right now. Is nobody is really taking it by the horns. I saw one of the beats tweet out, and I'm seeing it here in the standings. Every single AL East team is 5-5 in their last 10 games, which kind of paints the picture there. And then the Guardians. I think the Guardians have to be taken as a threat right now. They are good. The offense is sneaky. The bullpen is very good. They are allowing the second fewest runs in the American League right now, second only to the Mariners. But the Mariners' issue is they can't score runs. The Guardians can score runs. Can they score runs with the Orioles and the Yankees? Probably not. But are the Orioles and the Yankees, have teams solved the Yankees in terms of pitching around Judge and Soto? Doesn't seem like it because it's still kind of tough, but there's a clear kryptonite there. The Orioles have certainly slowed down offensively. I think I'd seen in the last 9 games they'd only scored 5 or more runs 3 or 4 times. It's not great, especially if you pair that with a pitching staff that's getting a little bit thin. You need to be scoring 4, 5, 6 runs every night, and if you're not, you're probably going to lose those games. But Jordan Westburg should be back. Jackson Holliday hopefully is ascending. Gunnar Henderson hopefully gets back to hitting home runs. And Adley Rutschman, I think people are worried about Adley Rutschman. His offense hasn't been great recently. He's was scratched recently with a back issue. It feels like James McCann is playing more often. James McCann's been playing pretty well, but he's not Adley Rutschman at 100%. So it's just a tenuous situation here for the Orioles, but it's a tenuous situation for the entire American League. And my gut here is to kind of go back on the old adage that I kind of harp on all the time with Mike Elias and the way he builds out teams and the way he views a 162 game regular season, which is simply to survive and ensure you get to the output that you expect it to be at the start of the season, which, we came into the year not thinking the Orioles were really a 101 win team. They were more of a 90-95 win team. That's basically what they're on pace to be right now. And they have the added benefit of hopefully getting healthier here in September. Eflin should be back. Rodriguez, they think, will be back. Westburg, the stuff's all positive there. Coulomb, if all these things pan out, the Orioles are in as good of a position as anybody else in the American League to go on a run in the postseason. But the confidence for me right now is rather limited. But yeah, ultimately, I think it just kind of comes down to the Orioles are going to rely on their internal talent and hope that it shines through. And offensively, I'm excited about that. Pitching is concerning. You can never have enough pitching. The Orioles are living it and breathing it every single day. And although this whole episode is about the starting pitching, the bullpen might be even more of a concern. And you know what? there's nothing else to do here other than rearrange the deck chairs a little bit. Now, doesn't mean the Titanic's sinking. The Rangers kind of did that last year, and it worked out because their offense also just showed off their might in the postseason. And these 2024 Orioles can hit home runs, they can bang, and I have every reason to believe that they can do that in the postseason too. So that's kind of what I'm going to rest my hat on is the Orioles offense has got to carry this team, and the pitching just has to be competent enough to put them in a position to do that. I think the Orioles can do that, but uh, they can't. I don't think they can. They can't take another significant injury. If Burns goes down, my tune's going to change quite a bit. Um, it's just they're at their absolute limit right now. So fingers crossed that this is it for the bad news, and the Orioles can kind of move forward from here. Maybe go on even a little bit of a run, take this AL East, get that wild card bye, and hopefully do a little bit better than last year. That's all I've got for this episode of the Warehouse Podcast. I'm recording it a little bit early because I'm going to be out of town. So, like I said, if anything happens in this Mets game, I saw while I was recording the Orioles are down 1-0. Francisco Lindor hit a home run. Hopefully they come back. But that's why I'm recording it a little bit early. I'll be out of town here for the weekend. So I wanted to get something set up. This will post on Thursday morning. So there might be some stuff out of date there in terms of injury information or any on-field play. But yeah, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can go over to Believe.com to check us out. There's also a bunch of other podcasts on Believe, so check anything out there that you find interesting. You can follow the show on X and Threads at The Warehouse Pod. And you can email the show at The Warehouse Pod. Or I'm sorry, The Warehouse Pod at gmail.com. And again, thanks to our sponsor, Bet Online. Use the code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for I don't know. They didn't tell me what you get for the code this time. Usually you get a free something. So use the promo code BELIEVE to let them know that we sent you. Maybe you'll get some kind of bonus. It's a surprise for all of us. Thanks everybody for listening, and have a great day.